Welcome to Victims and Villains, a podcast extension of the nonprofit daring to talk about mental health through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and I'm joined by our editor-in-chief, Mr. Cam Smith,
What's up?
to talk about The Machine.
The Machine.
So this movie is not the 2016 stand-up special that you can stream on Netflix.
Nope.
But it's loosely based on this. So it's kind of like a pseudo sequel to that special. Uh, yeah. So tell us a little bit about this.
Well, the fun story with it, Josh is deferring to me because I've spent probably the last month or two kind of immersing myself in Bert Kreischer's podcasting style, because I like his podcasting style because it's very conversational and it's very much like I'm talking to you, not the microphone, not whatever else, and I don't really have an agenda. So it's a thing that I kind of really enjoy. But when he first pitched, he pitched he wanted to do a movie to the guy that wound up, I think, directing. And the guy was like, "Oh yeah, great, but what movie do you actually want to do? Like, if you could do any story, what would you do?" And he's like, "Well, I would do the story of the Machine probably." And he's like, "Well, why aren't you?" And apparently Bert said, "Because I'm worried it would do well, and then I would actually get kidnapped by the Russian mafia." And the producer lit up and goes, "Okay, stop right there. You sold me. We're gonna do this." So it's based on the story of him going to Russia with his Russian class in the late 90s and hanging out with a couple guys in the mafia and winding up robbing an entire train, including his classmates.
Yeah, there's no real other way to talk about this movie because it's part of it is based in reality, and then part of it is kind of just this ludicrous heightened version of, I imagine, how Bert sees reality, or at least portions of his own life.
To some extent, yeah. He's talked about where Jimmy Tatro, playing young Bert, introduces himself to his classmate Ashley and says, "Hey, I'm Bert. I don't go to class much." That's a that's a real thing that Bert used to say when he was in college. So he actually, when that was shot, he burst into tears because he's like, "That's a real thing I used to say." I had this weird moment where he's like, "That was a real thing." But yeah, it is based in reality. It's also not. At no point, as far as I'm aware, has one of his daughters gotten pulled over. There's a clear split early on
Yeah.
where it stops being Bert Kreischer and it starts being Bert the Machine.
Yeah, it's this weird meta take on this story that kind of turned him into this viral sensation. And essentially, just for context, I guess we should talk about what that story is. So you being the resident Bert Kreischer expert on this podcast, tell us a little bit about the Machine story.
Well, I mean, the Machine story is basically what we've kind of already been talking about. He goes to Russia in the 90s with his Russian class, and while he's there, ends up hanging out with mafia guys. I've said this already.
Sure.
Hangs out with some mafia guys, winds up getting drunk with them on a train, partying, and they wind up robbing the train with him, which includes him robbing his classmates and himself because his bag was with his classmates. So there's a point in the movie where it's like, "Oh, the pocket knife that my dad gave me that has his name on it. That's a big deal. It's a family heirloom." Bert's dad, Al, actually did give him that pocket knife, and it really was in his bag. And Bert really did take it out of the bag and have to put it in the other bag and was like, that seems like it'd be, a really nice thing. Maybe we shouldn't take that one, and tried to not steal it from himself, but wound up stealing it from himself. And the thing about it is that a lot of people initially thought, "Oh, Bert's just making this up." Bert's Bert's comedy act to some extent, and just Bert in general, is best summed up as like Florida man makes it famous, like gets big and is famous now. Um,
Yeah, he's like a larger than life because in
he's a
preparation for
larger
this
than life
movie,
character, yeah.
I had never heard of him. I'd never listened to a podcast, streamed all of his uh Netflix specials, and then like started diving a little bit more into him, like similarly to you. And his stories are just absolutely like insane. So
Mhm.
it's not out of the realm of possibility to say that like some of the stories that he's like saying are like ludicrous and they are hard to believe.
But the wild thing is that when when his when this story went viral in 2016 or whenever that was, one of his classmates who was with him on the Russia trip saw it on Facebook and went, "Oh no, that's completely true. Here's pictures from the trip, from Bert hanging out with the mafia, from Bert robbing us with the mafia," and like had names and stuff to corroborate the whole experience. So suddenly, all of his fans were like, "Oh, this is just kind of made up." We're like, "Holy crap, this is true." Uh, this is really something Bert did.
Well, yeah, so the machine is this like it's or I guess like his like big screen. I don't want to say big screen debut.
Eh, yeah, Bert's been around for a while. He was on the Travel Channel for a while. Like he was a guy that hosted a show on the Travel Channel. He rode roller coasters and stuff mostly, but like went to a bunch of different places. He's had smaller parts in like TV shows and stuff. I don't think he's ever actually done a movie though, and he's definitely never starred in a movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was like a lot of the ones that I've seen him in have been like bit parts, like here and there. Like
Hmm.
I knew about the Travel Channel. I know that he did like a show that was very similar to like Jackass, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he knew he knew Johnny Knoxville before Jackass actually.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That checks
because
out
they were
though.
Florida guys. And then like he knew Bam Margera and Ryan Dunn from other things entirely. Like it's weird how much of Bert's history has been like a near miss with fame. And then in 2016, and he talks about this where he's like really glad that he became famous late in life because he's um I just today watched his interview with Jimmy Tatro. Jimmy, of course, playing young him in the movie, and something that he like brings up because Jimmy does a lot of wild stuff, like goes on a cruise to the north to like the North Pole or Alaska or wherever, and with like a bunch of really wealthy people. And this thing that Bert kind of kept harping on was like, but you're a normal person, you're a regular person. And at one point, they actually like broke this down where it's like, what? Well, hold on, what do you mean by that, Bert? And it's like, well, we got to the point that we are not because we're wealthy or anything like that. Nice, taking the shirt off so that you can method act, method act being Bert. No, um, not so that you didn't get here because you're wealthy. You got here because of you're working and you're talented and you did what you did and you put in the legwork, which is really true of Bert. He's been doing comedy for like
At least 20 years.
20 or more years.
Yeah.
I want to say he's been doing stand up longer than he has acting in any sort of capacity, whether it's hosting or anything else. Um, I don't know if that's true, and Bert, you can correct me if I'm wrong. but, um, but like he's put in the work. He's a regular dude who has gotten famous because of that work. Because of his like, yeah, the stories are a little fanciful, but they always have a core of truth at least. Um, and like the thing with the movie is it's based in reality. It's based on truth. Like he is like names are changed. He talks about the guy that he hung out with, the bandito or banditi, whatever they call them, who's like the mafia guy who like keeps them safe from other mafia people. Was a dude named Marco, who in the movie is Igor. And like there's a core of truth. Marco was a real person. Like he made a comment to the actor that I remember where he's like, no, no, no. He's Marco was more playful with stuff. There's a funny point in the movie where Igor gets introduced, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's the mafia guy. He's gonna keep us safe. He's very dangerous. Don't hang out with him." and then he goes, "Ooh," and kind of like fake scares the class or whatever. But like that was really how Marco was. So there's core truth bits that he's pulling from. I think the watch thing is probably like the core part of the movie is there's a watch that was one of the items stolen, and because of that, like the guy that it was stolen from said, "Screw honesty, it's not worth it," and became like the boss of the Russian mafia. And then his kids are trying to fight over the watch in order to take his place. Um, and I don't think the watch is true. I don't think the watch is a reality based thing. Um, but otherwise, like, yeah, it's pretty rooted in like there's a lot of real things. The pocket watch, some of the people. Um,
Yeah, it feels like an extension of his stand up comedy and like how he like story tells.
mhm.
Um, but let's jump into it now with this one. What are your general spoiler free thoughts on this movie?
Oh, it's great. It's very so. I realize I'm sort of um desensitized to Bert because I've been listening to him a bunch recently, so it doesn't occur to me when he drops an F bomb or random other words because I'm very used to him just saying that now because it's part of his normal podcasting regimen. So I didn't initially notice, like, didn't think about that when I went in that it would be very language filled, and it is. Um, but it's good. It's very definitely sort of a fanciful take on reality. Like, um, Bert's wife has a very thick Southern accent, and the actress that played her does not. Um, but like, there's bits and pieces in there where Bert's drawing on reality, but it is very much a fanciful version of that. Um, but it's good. It's a lot of like um kind of the idea of I was raised by a guy who was raised by a guy who had come back from World War II and didn't know how to talk about his feelings. Therefore, my dad didn't really know how to talk about his feelings with me. Therefore, I don't really know how to talk about my feelings with my daughters. Um, so there's like grappling with that, which is kind of a core piece, which is fun, where Mark Hamill comes in and plays the dad really well and kind of hits on that a little bit without like being super duper vulnerable with it, but can like draw from that really meaningful place because Mark Hamill has kids and presumably had to learn how to relate to them as well in kind of the same way that Bert has had to relate to his kids. And like your dad and my dad have had to kind of relate to us. So there's that core piece of like fatherhood is like a really actually fairly important piece of the movie, even though it doesn't seem to be overly center stage because this is an action movie that's very over the top, um, and kind of ridiculous at times, which is great. Um,
Yeah, it definitely feels like a throwback to like 80s uh movies like that tried to take itself seriously, but then by today's standards, like you go back and you watch something like Rambo or like Predator, and they just feel like very like over the top or like Bloodsport or any kind of like Van Damme, Schwarzenegger, Stallone. Like all of those movies feel like very like stylized and like products of their time.
well, this is very much motivated by that, and like once we get into spoilers, like there's moments in the movies where you go, that wouldn't happen in real life.
Yeah.
That could not happen in real life, regardless of whether Bert actually trained for it or not. Like that chain of events is just not a thing.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna lie, my thoughts on this movie were really surprising. I thought this movie had these like really deep pockets of like things like you brought up like legacy, like being such like an important thing on this one, but like also at the same time, this movie feels just like a 2 hour like therapy session for Bert.
which makes sense because Bert has been very open about his mental health and dealing with stuff. Like his wife got them all into therapy a number of years ago so that they could learn how to fight productively
Makes sense.
because it's him and his wife and his two daughters. Um, and you know, if you don't have another way to kind of talk about things and figure out how to relate with one another, you're just going to argue in circles
Mhm.
theoretically. Um, so so he's one of the foremost like comedians that has been partnered with BetterHelp for a long time. Who I think are they do they sponsor us or
They
endorse
do
us or
not.
they used to or something.
No.
Um, or they never did. Whatever. Um,
They're a great resource.
they're a great resource. BetterHelp is great. But they're a normal channel sponsor for him. And he talks about how he's used them for a long time. One of the things that he'll do is he'll like call his therapist and walk on the treadmill for an hour while he's talking to them. And that's a high point for him is he can do that. And so he'll talk about that, you know, on his podcast and the ads for his podcast. But like he's pretty upfront about, you know, I've dealt with mental health and all of its various um in all of the different ways that it can kind of pop up and confront a performer, whether it's um yeah, I can't think of it. Where he's basically like I'm in this space and I don't deserve anything that's gotten me to here, or I don't deserve to be here
Oh,
because I'm not funny.
you're talking about imposter syndrome.
That's it, imposter syndrome. Um, we can cut that whole chunk where
Yeah.
he's like, I can't think of this. Yeah, imposter syndrome. He's dealt with that. He's dealt with you know being on the road all the time, not being on the road, and how that shows up for a performer. Because for them, like for a stand-up comedian, like being on the road is kind of like working out,
Hmm.
where you're constantly sort of honing your craft. And this is something that I enjoy about his podcast is that when he has other comedians on, that's one of the things that he'll ask is like, how are you honing kind of what you're doing? You're moving towards like a special or whatever. Um, and he like will check on his friends and stuff. And it's cool to see that where it's like you can kind of sit back and go, this is a practical side of a guy who has run into this in his own life going, this is an important thing for us to worry about mental health wise and experientially in terms of career. Let me make sure that I'm bringing it up to other people. Um,
Yeah, when we initially talked about doing this as an episode, I was really like even like the up until the I can't remember the name of the main Russian chick who kidnaps them originally in the beginning of the film.
Irina, I
Yeah.
think. Irina, something like that.
Yeah, when she like shows up, like the I remember sitting in the theater for like the first like 15-20 minutes and being like, how are we gonna make an episode about this?
I
And it gets like further
had no doubt.
yeah, it gets like further into the movie and like just there are like I talked about these like little pockets of just like depth that like really surprised me because this movie's like just ludicrous and it is such a throwback to like 80s
I
films.
mean, there's moments where it's balls to the wall action, just nonstop. I mean, it's not spoiling anything to tell you that at one point Bert gets thrown off of a train.
Yeah.
Like it's like yeah, it's kind of a wild once they get rolling, it just kind of goes.
Yeah.
Um
And I was really surprised by a lot of those elements of it. And Mark, if you happen to hear this, notice that the roles have been switched because typically when I'm podcasting with Mark, I'm the guy that's like doing the deep dive and like coming into this well prepared. I'm like, I watched a couple of Netflix specials. I think I know what I'm talking about.
well
No, I
what's
don't.
really funny for me is like I think I've seen one of his Netflix specials maybe,
Mhm.
but Bert as a person is way more fascinating to me. Like I'm thinking about doing a podcast at some point in the future or starting a series of them just on like favorite characters. And there's a part of me that wants to do an episode at some point on Bert Kreischer just as he's one of my favorite characters because he's a family man who did the work, got where he is, has done the mental health work to like make sure that he's okay, and like has a really solid framework of people around him like Tom Segura and Joe Rogan. Whatever your thoughts on Joe Rogan are, at least when it comes to Bert Kreischer, Joe Rogan's been really, really solid to Bert. And people like Joey Diaz, who is a insane comic who's done every drug under the sun, probably, um, including once Bert Kreischer got drugged by one of his other comic friends with ecstasy, and as soon as Bert realized that, he called Joey Diaz, and Joey called him or came over, took the rest of the ecstasy, like grabbed his arm and was like, "We're going down together, man. Like we're gonna be okay." And like Bert has this really wild like group community who's just like, "We are here for you because you're a good dude and you love your wife." Like Bert talks about going to strip clubs all the time, and he'll take other people with him, and he'll make sure that they have a good time. But he's like, I'm married to Leanne. I love Leanne. I'm good. I don't need a lap dance. I'm fine. Like, I'm just here to make sure they have a good time. And like, that's his whole thing. Like, he'll go party with people and be a little ridiculous, but like, at the end of the day, he's a good dude who like, that's his whole thing. And he's gotten famous because he has had these kind of ridiculous experiences while being a good dude. But like, at the core of things, he's just a good dude who wants to take care of people around him.
Yeah, my favorite story of his is how Rachel Ray got him to skydive. I don't know if you've ever heard that story, but like apparently he did an appearance on Rachel Ray like probably like early 2010s,
And
and
Rachel Ray for me is
she's the
cooking
cooking
show. Okay,
lady.
yeah, yeah,
She had her show at
sure.
one point. Bert was a guest. She was like, "What's one thing that you would never do?" And he was like, "Skydive." Like it's just terrifying to me. And so she goes out and basically like I just asked him this, and so we're gonna take him skydiving, and like basically he ends up doing it and like ends up freaking out, and um Rachel Ray is just sitting back, just like total pro, total boss. She's like, it's too late for this. And then like before he knows it, he was just out, and he was just like, Rachel Ray's like a gangster, just straight up. Like there's no way around it. So
I mean, Bird talks so well of everybody else that he knows, like especially when they're not there. Like he's very flattering to their face, but then he's on a different podcast entirely. He was on Logan Paul's podcast promoting the movie, and Logan Paul's co-host, I don't know the guy's last name, but his first name's Mike. He's dated a bunch of different porn stars, but at some point they were talking about going to a party later in the night, and Whitney Cummings, who's another comedian who's been on Bertcast all the time, um, came up, and the guy was like, "I might shoot my shot, might ask her out." And Bert's immediately like, "Dude, she's a gangster. She's a badass. Like, do it. It would be awesome. But like, just be aware, she's the best." And he just had nothing but glowing things to say about her, and he just is that way with people, and it's really cool. It's very like there's a part of me that's like I want to be that way, where it's like I can be very nice to you to your face, but then like if I'm talking about you with somebody else, like you have nothing to worry about because Cam's got my back. He's gonna talk to me about me like I'm the best person ever because you are.
that is character, something that we don't talk enough about in today's day and age. But let's go ahead and jump into spoiler warnings right now. So if you guys have not seen The Machine,
Go do it because it's great. It's a trip.
the feature length film, we're about to jump into spoilers, and I don't even know really where to begin with this movie. I loved a lot of the things about it. I don't know if you want to like jump into the mental health of this movie, the kind of like the action, like the ridiculousness of it, like the comedy of it, performances.
There's lots of we'll start performances just because there's a fun point from that. One of the things I love about this movie is the real world counterpart, for the most part, got to pick who played them. So Bert's Bert obviously plays himself, but his wife Leanne picked the actress who played her. And then Leanne also picked Jimmy Tatro, who played Young Bert, to play Young Bert, because of a particular line from another thing that Jimmy Tatro was in, which is hilarious. You'll have to find it. Bert has brought it up a number of times. Um, but Bert's daughter Georgia picked the actress that played Sasha, because Sasha sort of is Georgia in this movie. Um, and at least as far as that's concerned, like the real people had an actual hand in kind of deciding who was to play them, which is really neat as far as I'm concerned. But then with performance wise, like Bert went full tilt, balls to the wall, 100% on this. Like
Yeah, he did.
there's there's a moment early on where he's walking into Igor's old room because he remembers that Igor had a stash in the wall, and the wall has been redone. And Bert punches the wall with his hand, breaks open the drywall, and did that in real life and actually broke his left hand, from what I understand
That's
from like
amazing.
Bert talking about things. Like he did as many of his own stunts as he could, from what I know. Um, and there's a bunch of really wild stunt wise stuff.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, if it's always really hard to gauge an actor performance from a non-traditional actor. Like anytime that you have like a male model or like an athlete or someone that have the doesn't normally step into the world of cinema, it's sometimes always really hard to kind of talk about like their performance. And Bert playing Bert like was really great.
Well, that was something that actually stuck with me, was like Bert talked about on one of the episodes. I think it was what's his cooking show called? I told you earlier.
Oh,
Um,
something's burning.
Something's Burning. He had the Hamills on. He had Chelsea. Is it Mary Lou? I can't remember Mark's wife's name. But Chelsea's is Mark's daughter, and she was over in Serbia with them, and of course Mark was on as well. But Bert was talking about how there was a scene that he had with the actress that played Irina, and he was having a different conversation with her, and they were coming up to when they were gonna actually start the scene, and partway through the lead up, he asked her a question that so threw her that she had to like take a step back and actually like recenter herself in the character. And he went, "Oh wait, like this is a thing that real actors do. Maybe I should be doing something like
Yeah.
this," because Bert's not really acting throughout this movie. Bert's just being Bert, which he does really really well. But like like knowing that going in was really interesting because I saw the thread through the thing where it's very much just like Bert being like, dude, I'm stoked to be here. And Mark Hamill's next to him playing Al Kreischer, his dad, and Mark kind of disappears into that role to an extent. Like I told you when we ate dinner earlier with your wife Erica, when Mark actually when they set up the Skype call with Mark, Mark had seen and read the script already and kind of came in slightly like in character. And one of the first things Mark asked Bert, which is what convinced Bert that Mark should be his dad in this role, was, so you're still doing the thing where you take your shirt off, which is, I guess, a thing that Bert's actual dad brings up all the time to Bert. Um, but that like convinced Bert right away that Mark would play his dad because he sort of already had kind of a handle on how that character was supposed to be. Um, but Bert is just this genuine dude who's just playing himself, surrounded by a very, very talented group of actors and actresses to kind of help him tell this story.
Yeah, I grew up watching Mark Hamill on Batman the Animated Series, of course, the original trilogies.
Yep, of Star Wars.
And like anytime that he is able to kind of break that like typical like this is what I think a Mark Hamill role is, it's always really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I would dare say that I was more interested coming into this movie to see the performance from Mark Hamill than I actually was Bert Kreischer. Because I just I love actors when they play against their types.
Mm-hmm.
And within like immediately within the first like 2 minutes of Hamill being on screen, like he's just a guy that gets underneath your skin.
If he wants to, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's a scene like when they're in Russia where the two of them have been separated and they get back and he's like he's hanging out with the Russian mafia and like they're calling him the prototype machine and
Because he's the father of the machine.
he's
Yeah.
the father of the
Yeah.
machine and
He's the original.
he's like doing like speed and cocaine and like sleeping with just like random chicks. It's just kind of like this movie I feel like is probably one of Hamill's best performances, at least in the live action ring.
Yeah. I haven't seen the Star Wars movies recently. By the way, the Bird is showing the 3 original starting this Sunday and then next Sunday and then the Sunday after.
Nice.
Just sticking that in your ear. Because I want to go because I haven't like it's been a while since I've watched those original movies. And the thing that I kind of have stuck in my head is like Mark Hamill is a decent actor at that point in his career, but he wasn't like a great one. Like Luke has his moments, but he's not this super well acted necessarily character from what I remember. Granted, this was years ago. My brother made me watch the 6th Star Wars movie every Saturday for probably 2 or 3 years.
Nice.
But so I know that one well, but I don't really remember A New Hope, let alone Empire Strikes Back. But aside from that, I think the main thing that I really know Hamill from is actually his vocal performances opposite Kevin Conroy.
Mhm.
In not the animated
Joker.
series,
But the Arkham games.
but the Arkham games, which he's incredible with. And I think he's played the Trickster once or twice, who's a Flash villain.
Mhm.
But I am not actually super familiar with much of what Mark Hamill's really done.
So the big thing that like I've seen outside of them is he had a short-lived cameo in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back from 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe if I remember correctly, his character's name was something like the Cock Gobbler. He was a villain for Blunt Man and Chronic, which is their kind of like in-universe Batman and Robin stoner comedy duo.
It's Ray and Silent Bob, yeah.
And he was really great in that. And like it took me into like coming into an adulthood and rewatching that movie and just being like, this is Mark Hamill, this is Luke Skywalker, this is so weird. But it's also like it's also really weird to like because that live action version of him is like the only like long form frame of reference that I have because I grew
Sure.
up on him as Joker and I didn't see him as Trickster until I was like well into adulthood. So like the only thing I had like frame of reference wise is like
It's Luke Skywalker, and then
yeah, Luke Skywalker is this like very like he's like kind of this like very shy but like heroic kind of stand
who's
up
it?
guy.
Luke's. We're not really talking about Luke Skywalker here, but Skywalker is a character that starts in a place of not knowing really who he is,
Yeah.
discovering he has this bigger thing, and then trying to work toward it, but walking away from it partway through, and then coming back and realizing, oh, I can't finish the way I was doing it. I have to figure it out on my own. And then you kind of lose anything beyond that because that's all Legends canon. Um, any aspect of him actually going out and like finding Jedi holocrons or whatever, and really like expounding on that character. So instead, you have Hamill coming back and doing the new trilogy with various directors in control that aren't George Lucas, that have a different vision for who Luke Skywalker is at that point. And something interesting is Hamill doesn't actually acknowledge his final performance as Luke Skywalker as Luke Skywalker. He calls him like Jake something. Like it's kind of like that's not the Luke Skywalker that I know. But he's such a great choice for Bert's dad because he just sort of like instantly understood this is a character that needs to A, needle at Bert in a way that can kind of get under Bert's skin, but also have, a real I do care for my son and I'm willing to do kind of ridiculous things like push him off of a train or stab a large tattooed Russian gangster with a pocket knife, which had maybe a 2.5, maybe 3 inch blade on it, not a long knife at all, in order to like get my son away. And like it's cool that Mark Hamill can put that much depth into a character that doesn't feel like it necessarily needed to have that kind of depth.
Well, I think the reason that like I brought up Star Wars is just because like I was talking with my sister last night and like I ended up like watching the Black Mirror episode with Miley Cyrus and like we both grew up on like Hannah Montana, so it's like it's weird hearing like Hannah Montana like do cuss words and stuff like that. So it's kind of like
Dude,
was weird.
speaking of people who are a badass, Miley Cyrus. Anyway,
It was weird to hear like him kind of like I felt like this was the first time that I actually got to see Hamill like in live action, like actually show the depth of his range.
Sure, because it's quite a depth.
Yeah, because I feel like you don't really get that in Star Wars, and
Not really.
here he brings this like really like there are really quite a few scenes where like he kind of starts off as kind of like the quirky sidekick where like anytime he's around anyone from like Russia, like his thing is like my hands go up. Like that's kind of his shtick.
Yeah.
But then he has these like little like just moments where like you see the wisdom and you see like his like father figure. So there's a lot of depth that gravity that he's able to bring to this. And I think it speaks to what this film talks about in terms of legacy.
Yeah. One of the pieces that really stuck out for me, specifically in line with that, was when Mark as Al is interacting with Bert's kids, his grandkids. That was cool. Where it just very much felt like, no, this is really their grandpa. Like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Like, how are like checking in on them, and not really doing anything besides just being a grandpa in those moments. Like, no action hero, nothing's expected, no hint of what he's going to do. He's just being a good dude, checking in on his family because he's in town.
Yeah, but I think it's so interesting that like this movie, like, it's not just necessarily about, like, the relationship between Bert and Albert.
It's also about the relationship of Bert with himself.
Not only that, I was gonna say, like, Anya, like, also, like, the whole, like, plot of the fact that this is, like, siblings essentially rushing to, like, get this, like,
The pocket watch.
pocket watch
Yeah.
in order to control this empire, but they also at the same time seem like they're trying to prove their own worth
To their own father.
to their
Yeah.
own father.
Mhm. Yeah. There's sort of a subtext. Not sort of. It's very blatant in your face. Irina, you can't be the crime boss. You're a woman. You know, very blatant in your face. That's the whole thing. I don't know if Russia is actually like that. But it was interesting that they sort of did kind of pull on that kind of that strong, like, all of the Russian gangsters are masculine dudes who are like, what did the one guy say? They're cosplaying.
Oh, American History X.
That's that's so funny. Um, like all the Russian gangsters, they look like they look tough, but they look American movie villain tough.
Yeah. I think that goes back to the idea of this being like a throwback, like over the top,
Yeah.
schlocky 80s.
Yeah, because there was a point where all of the villains in the action movies were Russian guys.
Yes.
During the Cold War.
Yeah.
You know, it's the reason one of Rocky's main villains.
Yeah, I was gonna say that is Draco or something.
Yeah, is the big Russian boxer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's cool to have, like, because you can kind of pull on those guys, but also at the same time pull from, like, cultural things like the tattooing culture and stuff of that area, because it's so different from here, with face tattoos and very specific. Like, I want to say the, like, naval star tattoos that the Irina kind of had on her shoulders. I want to say those are like a specifically Russian thing, because they'll pop up in America, but it's like
it means
it's like a
something different.
well-known mafia, like Russian mob thing. I think I could be talking out of the left side of my mouth. I don't know, but
well, going back to like this like subject of legacy, like, and specifically like how legacy affects your mental health, I think it's really interesting to have a movie like that in 2023 when we are thinking about the instant. Like, social media has kind of trained our brains to think about the here and the now, and how quickly that now is fleeting, to where I don't think we really give a lot of concept to this idea of either birthing the next generation, or what we're gonna be like when we dead, or like what are people gonna remember about us when we're no longer here. And this idea of not only that relationship between Bert and Albert, of what you see in that version, but also you see it with Sasha and Bert's relationship, because there's there was like this like embarrassing thing that happened that went viral within the film, and
it's not, that moment is not out of the realm of possibility for something Bert Kreischer might actually do.
no,
one of his, like, well-known ads that he actually did for, I think it was Red Rock, was he had to go get surgery done, so he said, "Hey, inject me with the thing, and I'm gonna do a promo for this while I'm going under." And he, like, actually recorded a promo while the guy's counting backwards from 10, and he lasted for like 3 or 4 seconds before his arm went numb, and he dropped the phone on his chest, so you can still hear Bert talking, but it just all goes black. So when, Bert, I don't know that Bert would actually get that messed up with Tom Segura. I know they do sober, like, that group of guys does a sober October, but this time in particular, Bert's alluding to he and Tom doing Two Bears, One Cave, which is one of Bert's other podcasts, and getting very drunk together, and Bert going, "Hey, daughter, older daughter who has learner's permit, I need you to drive up here and pick me up because I'm too drunk to drive home. And you have your learner's permit, so me being in the car will be fine." And that's whatever, but she gets pulled over because she rolls a stop sign, and Bert live streams from like when she gets pulled over until he passes out
Yeah.
in the back seat. And that's not out of the realm of possibility for something that Bert Kreischer might actually do. but it's sort of blown slightly out of proportion for the movie, so that there's kind of a central conflict point between him and his daughter. But you're right. The focus on social media and promotion and getting content out there interferes with his relationship with his daughter, and kind of messes with that in a fairly big way.
Yeah, because like the introductory scene, up until like the last scene, anytime that they share a frame together, it is always like Bert is this larger than life guy, and Sasha just kind of wants this like quiet, like nature. Like that's just kind of, she wants the complete opposite
Yep.
of everything a Bert wants, and
Which is also not that far off from reality either.
Sure.
Neither of his daughters really want much to do with Bert's fame.
Which
They've
is
both
interesting.
they've
Yeah.
both been on his and his wife's podcasts a few times, but it's not a thing that either of them is like picked up and kind of run with. Like they sort of Bert got banned from college tours with his daughter, because as soon as people realize, hey, it's the machine, like that's it. Now it's the machine's daughters coming here, and Georgia has no chance at an actual like normal college experience. So that's kind of based on reality.
Yeah, but like the entire time, like you can kind of see like he's trying to grapple with like how to kind of course correct things and like
He's trying to like manage it, and still, because where he is, he thinks is because he's doing the right thing for his family.
yeah, it's really interesting too that you there's a line that they're like this film opens up on a therapy session essentially that like ends up being this like group therapy session. And like the therapist says something to the extent of like Bert is kind of like brought his family for very vain reasons, and like he's the therapist says something to the extent of like progress is something that should be seen. It's not something that necessarily needs to be
It's
like
pointed out.
pointed to.
Yeah.
And like, but you kind of see like that this entire incident has kind of like rippled effect into like all of his relationships with his family, and but you also kind of like plant on of like that where him and his father are, that there's this like unresolved trauma or tension that exists between, and
Yeah. Which
yeah,
the root of that, the real life thing with that is very much when Bert and the director started talking about the movie, they clicked over the fact that both of their fathers had sons that kind of grew up to be kind of different than they expected.
mhm.
So it's kind of a thing that they just took and ran with it, and just made it kind of a central part of the movie, which is kind of a neat thing.
So we keep talking about it, but I want to give credit to the director of this. His name is Peter Atencio, and he's also the director of his most.
Oh, okay. Then it's a different guy. There's a Kale or Caleb or something. Maybe maybe he's a producer. Because they did connect with Peter on that dad thing, but it was the other guy, the guy that got
Kale Broiler
probably.
is the production executive.
That's the guy that went to Bert and was like, if you could do a movie, what would you do? And Bert was like, oh, I do the machine story. That's that guy. So they connected over that father thing, and then when they actually talked to Peter, the director, he also kind of connected it with that. So there's the other neat thing with this story is there's like a real world three influential forces on this movie are pulling from real life examples where, my dad wanted a son, but maybe not necessarily a comic son or an artist son or an actor son, wanted something else for
Well,
his legacy.
Well, at what point, like, in terms of like legacy, like, do you kind of like say, I need to do what makes me happy? And I need to do like, because one of the things that like growing up, my dad owned his own like car detailing business.
Mm.
And I didn't want anything to like do with like cars. Like, cars, I don't know anything about cars now as an adult. And maybe it's because like it was my first job and like I spent summers there, so like I would help like wax and like vacuum and like detail. And
Was there sort of any expectation that you would take over the business someday?
there was.
There was. Okay.
I was like probably 13 or 14. My dad was like, I'm gonna build this up essentially into like an empire
Mm-hmm.
and
With
like
3
have
convenient locations.
have all of these like dealerships like deals with for you guys, and like it'll be you and your sister that run it, and
Right.
like
I'm setting it up so that you guys can take it over and
I
be
just
cared
I
for.
like I wrestled
Yeah.
with that for years, and
Sure.
like it like I felt like because I didn't want that I was like I failed as like a son,
Mm-hmm.
and like to this like day, like my dad tells me all the time, like I'm proud of you, I'm proud of you, and like it took a long time for me to like for it to click that it's like, all right, he is clearly he is like he's not just saying this like on nauseam. Like I need to accept the fact that like I went a different path. I always joke with my sister and say that like I feel like the black sheep of my family, but like you know it's always really hard to kind of have a parent that is going to like have this expectation for your life and then something happens along the way and you take a complete turn.
Mm-hmm.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
You were asking a question or making a point with it, or?
I was making fun with it.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have a story like that. My dad's a pastor and a teacher. Teaches at a small private Christian school. So I've never felt like I have something I'm stepping into at some point, or something that's expected for me to step into at some point. But my dad's not a carpet salesman like Bert's in the movie, which is also an interesting slight departure. Bert's actual dad is a lawyer. I shouldn't say was. He's still alive from what I know.
Oh, he very much is.
But Al Kreischer, Bert's real life dad, was a lawyer, worked for the Church of Scientology at one point, like was a very good
Wild.
lawyer.
Just
But
absolutely wild.
But I think where he expected Bert to be was like, we live in Florida, you're going to be a football player at some point. And Bert was for a little bit, I think. Not necessarily a very good one, but I mean, he went to college and wound up in this Russian class, and like he there's a snippet of the special at the beginning of the movie where he talks about, he's such a bad student, he thought he was signing up for Spanish and didn't realize it was Russian until it was too late.
3 classes in.
Like, so yeah, it's a different thing, but it's still kind of based on that. aspect. Whereas, so there is some of that legacy thing where it's like you're going to take over the family business, which is where it's interesting that you have Alexei, Irina, and Vanya, the three siblings in the Russian mafia who are trying to find the pocket watch so they can take over their dad's business. That's sort of interesting that there's almost an identical
It's a great
relationship.
parallel juxtaposition that
Mhm.
runs throughout the film where you're watching one parent that is like kind of in like mild disappointment over the paths that their offspring have chosen, and then you have another like set of offsprings that are essentially trying to prove their worth to their father.
Yeah. And Bert kind of watching it, kind of going, I hope I don't wind up that way with my girls.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing what I need to for them. But boy, I hope they don't feel like they need to do a certain thing or live a certain way in order to achieve this.
Yeah. Well, I think that's gonna do it. Let's run this through the Rorschach rating scale, 0 to 5, halves being allowed. Where does this one land for you?
Dude, I'm at like probably like a 4.75, maybe even a 5.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was good. Like I was expecting it to be good. Um, I wasn't. I wasn't expecting it to be Bert Kreischer's hands in somebody's throat, holding him out the wall, holding him out the window of a train. Good. That was wild. But yeah, I didn't even necessarily expect to go in realizing it was going to be funny, even though it is Bert Kreischer. But like, it was genuinely pretty funny in spots.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, I agree with a
It's
lot
up
of the.
there. It's
I
up there.
agree with a lot of things you say. For me, like I think I've proven myself not quite the Kreischer fan on this podcast, or researcher, but I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 3.5. I think this is a strong
Mm,
comedy, but I think there are some things where like at least like seeing this with you, like there were moments in this movie that like you laughed, but I didn't. And so like that's the thing that's like really hard to like judge comedy because
sure.
comedy is like one of those things that like is super subjective. So like what makes someone else laugh,
Well,
what makes one person laugh doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna
and
make
another
the other
piece too
person.
is like the references given. Like if there's a reference dropped, is everybody gonna laugh at it? The American history cosplayers, you and I laughed at that, and Erica didn't. And I went, I wonder if Erica knows what that is, or if that's just not funny to her.
Do you know what American
Um,
History X is?
Other than American history, I know.
Okay.
okay, yeah. So that's so like there's a reference that just missed her. Yeah.
I have to say probably one of my favorite parts of this movie is the scene where they go to Igor's village
Mm-hmm.
and she's talking Anya's talking about
Irina.
Irina's talking about
Anya is the actress, right?
maybe I don't know how you
I
say
think
I don't know how you
Anya's the
say
actress.
technically say her name. But she's talking about how like she loves like she has this like really deep like philosophical breakthrough for Bert. It's talking about how like she pulled it from Family Matters.
Yeah.
And there's this scene at the end where like she shoots her dad and there's like this really tense scene and she just turns around to Bert and Mark Hamill's character and just goes, "Did I do that?" And it's such a funny moment. It was
unexpected.
probably the funniest thing.
And then she turns around and her face goes hard again.
Yeah. It was
Man.
like yeah, the comedy in this movie, like I feel like hits really strong, but like there are jokes that like just didn't land for me.
Well, and I don't know that I would, if I was treating it just as a comedy, I don't think I would put it at a 4.75 or a 5. Like I'm factoring in some of the action.
I wish
If it was just on its merits as a comedy, I think I'd be down in the threes with you.
So I will also say, like, in terms of like an action movie, I feel like I wanted more action.
That's fair.
Like there are, I feel like I can count on like one hand, like how many like action sequences there are.
Well, so the whole chunk of her coming down the staircase was awesome.
Yes.
And then the other kind of cool bit is her.
Like them on like the train was cool.
Mhm.
Like obviously the shootout at the end was good, but like
That was cool too, but it was
felt like there
like
wasn't enough of
they
it.
sort of went over the top for Bert's section, but
Mhm.
like her section was like there was a lot of physicality in that was pretty cool. And
She
like they sort of intentionally, like she's not the main character right there,
no.
so they very much kind of weren't paying attention to her, but she was working it.
Yeah, so the actress's name that plays her is Iva uh Barrick. She was probably my favorite part of the entire movie.
You think so?
I mean, not to say that like I didn't like everyone, but like I just loved her like arc and kind
Yeah.
of like discovering herself, and like her and Bert's relationship was one of my favorite things in this movie. But also at the same time, like there was just a lot of like really unexpected moments from her character, of her being like a badass or like the Urkel stuff, and
hmm
uh
And I think maybe that's also part of where we diverge in terms of ratings. Is
sure.
you're watching it as a film, and I'm kind of more watching it knowing this is based on Bert's real life. I can see aspects of Bert in here. I love the way Jimmy Tatro plays young Bert
Mhm.
because it's dead on. Um, I was sort of expecting just a version of Bert, but I mean, it is a version of Bert, but it's like the Bert version of Bert. Um, just except that it's Jimmy Tatro playing it, not Bert himself. Um, and just knowing that like there's bits and pieces of this rooted in reality and being able to pick out those was really cool to
Yeah.
me. And also kind of watching some of like knowing that some of this stuff is actually mental health things that Bert has really like dealt with.
And I
Um,
feel like from like that's really what like, because originally like I was gonna go a 3, but I feel like some of the deeper moments within this movie kind of push it over. It's a
mhm,
3.5. Because I do think that like this film feels like an exercise for him to kind of like work through some of his trauma or his demons,
sure.
and I think that it really works really well. The scene where like they're having the shootout in the climax of this movie, and like Mark Hamill's character's on drugs, and like they're having this like really genuine heart to heart, and they
Mhm.
have a breakthrough, and
And then they get shot at.
yeah, then they get shot at. Like it's those like little moments where I feel like this film like really shines, and
Yeah,
like
no, I agree.
kind of really you get to hear that uh, like Bert's voice and kind of like his influence in the script.
hmm Yeah, it was good. I liked it. I
So
want to see 2 and 3.
yeah, if we get sequels,
Bert's apparently already trying to sell him.
Look, at this
So
point, if it doesn't if it doesn't hit theatrically, he's got a good thing going with Netflix.
sure,
It'll go there.
yeah, that'd be cool.
So
And I'm looking forward to the day that we have a studio and we can actually reach out and be like, "Hey, Bert, we want to have you come in and actually talk about mental health stuff because you have a history of talking about your mental health and that being important, and
yeah,
you're you're a dude who knows how to have a conversation with a microphone in front of you in a really real way."
maybe he hears this. Maybe he hears this
I mean, I would
podcast.
love it. I would love it if he hears this and goes, "Sure, I'll stop in." Like, we'll, I don't know, remodel your living room briefly so that we can have that with Bert Kreischer. That'd be cool.
Yeah. So if you guys have seen The Machine or are fans of Bert Kreischer, let
Go
us
check it
know.
out. Go check
Yeah.
it out.
Where can people find you online?
Find me online. I'm at well, I mean, I have social medias, but they're really not important at this point. I'm not spending a lot of time on them, which is kind of great, kind of freeing.
Sure.
Um, I don't even remember immediately what they are. TheMindofMoody.wordpress.com, I think, is where most of my thoughts are going at this point, which is not saying a whole lot because I have a poem there that I put up within the last week, and then the last thing before that was reviews of the Fiesta pack of Jarritos sodas in like December.
So just random stuff.
So, yeah, I have a lot of I put thoughts up there, um, stuff that isn't movie reviews. Otherwise, you can find my thoughts. My most recent review is The Thief Collector, which is a documentary about an art theft that was unsolved for 32 years. That went up today, as of us recording this. So, I also really like that movie. So you can find me on our website doing our reviews. Really?
Yeah, so you guys can follow me. I'm on Victim. I'm not. You guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd. It's really the only social media I'm active on. At Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can follow us wherever you guys get your podcast from. Also, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And yeah, we'll subscribe to this feed, subscribe to the other feeds, and we'll catch you guys soon.